All right, welcome back, everybody. So, in our last reading, we actually got cut off halfway through reading the second verse. That was my bad. Something just happened with the recording, and I don't exactly know what. But we will be continuing now. Just to rehash what we went over in the second verse, it is the idea that something can come from its opposite. Um, Nietzsche wrote that he believes, or at least religious authority figures, will try and generate the belief that virtues are pure things on their own that can only be gifted to mortals from the divine and that they cannot stem from any other mortal source, whereas everything from the world is evil. However, it is very, very likely that something like that can actually still come from its opposite. The concept of yin and yang falls into this, where there's a little bit of good and evil mixed in, and they're always in harmony with each other. So we'll be continuing now. So let us read verse 3. Having kept a sharp eye on philosophers, and having read between their lines long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of conscious thinking must be continued among the instinctive functions, and it is so even in the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew, as one learned anew about heredity and innateness. As little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, just as little is being conscious opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly influenced by his instincts and forced into definite channels. And behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, there are violations, or to speak more plainly, physiological demands for the maintenance of a definite mode for life. For example, that the certain is worth more than the uncertain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Such violations, in spite of their regulative importance for us, might notwithstanding be only superficial evaluations. Special kinds of niaiserie, such as may be necessary for the maintenance of beings such as ourselves, supposing in effect that man is not just the measure of things. So here Nietzsche talks about something very important, and that is the that thinking falls in line with one's nature, maybe even biological nature. He likes to akin thinking to be subject to hereditary, saying that the way we think aren't isn't exactly influenced just by our experiences, but actually by our very DNA. That some of our thinking is as a result of what we inherited from our parents and from our other ancestors, meaning that our biases are, we can have inherent biological biases in our thinking that we are not even aware of, that we just have these biases hardwired into us from the moment we are basically conceived. I would like to expand on this a little bit more and say that there are biases or modes of thinking that we develop also in our early childhood, our formative years. Um, Again, we have absolutely no control over this. So when we are conceived, there's already patterns of thinking that is ingrained in us. And then when we're born and in those first 3 years of life, that is where most of our character, our personality develops. And as a result, that's where most of our thinking comes from. So it is very interesting that people don't actually give this enough credit, even in the modern day. We do not acknowledge that our thinking can be influenced by our biology or by our early years, our formative years. And that has some disastrous consequences because we can then just keep following these biases without even considering what they're doing to us or that we are just following this because we believe it's right naturally. Something very interesting to think about in your own daily life is what you believe, what you think actually a natural thing, a natural process, something that you just learned, or is it just something that your biology is telling you, something more instinctive? Verse 4 then continues to say, the falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here perhaps that our new language sounds more strangely. The question is how far an opinion is life furthering, life preserving, species preserving, perhaps species rearing, and we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions, to which the synthetic judgments a priori belong, are the most indispensable to us. That without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner, and philosophy which ventures to do so has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. The title of the book has made its first appearance here in this verse. So, what does this one mean? I think the first sentence, the falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It just says it all. Um, so in the first chapter, we learned that, in the first verse, we saw that Nietzsche was objecting to the pursuit of truth, where philosophers, and even today, where everybody wants to pursue the truth, the objective truth, and nothing but the truth. Here he's saying, well, falsehoods also have value, lies have value. It's not just the truth that can bring new things forward, it's falsehoods as well. Um, because you can even measure the value of a falsehood, as he here states, as life furthering, life preserving, species preserving, even species rearing. What this one means is that you can build a lot on a falsehood. You can progress a lot on a falsehood. Um, Science works on this principle, actually, because if you look at the true scientific method, nothing is truly proven. There are very few laws in science. There are a lot of theories, there's a lot of hypotheses, but when the scientific method comes into play, you never try and prove that your theory or your hypothesis is true. You always try and disprove it. And until it is proven incorrect, a hypothesis will be held on as a theory. And the working theory will be used in order to further knowledge. As long as that theory holds, it will continue to be quote unquote true. It's never true. Um, and science can go a long way working with a false theory or even incomplete theory. It's only until later on when a new mode of testing or new branch of knowledge comes along which can actually disprove that theory that theory will be discarded and be known as false. And a new theory will take its place, and again that theory will hold only as true on the condition that nobody can prove it false yet. And that falls right in line with what Nietzsche says here, that the falseness of an opinion does not determine its value. Sometimes a false opinion is more valuable than truth, or more valuable than nothing at all, because it allows us to continue. And if you want to think about it in your own personal life, how many times have you been saved by a well placed lie, a well told lie? Telling somebody or some people the truth is not always the best strategy. It can cause more harm than it can cause good. you see this a lot with media where governments will do a media blackout because they don't want people to start panicking just yet, because they might control the situation later. So it's not the truth is not always the right thing for the people. Sometimes withholding it and spreading a lie is more valuable. And once you start considering this, you start moving beyond good and evil. Because once you realize that there's value in lying or value in the false opinions, then you start playing around with it more. You still use the truth because it's still valuable, but you now realize that this supposedly evil thing is also valuable. Alright, moving on to verse 5. That which causes philosophers to be regarded half distrustfully, half mockingly, is not the oft repeated discovery how innocent they are, how often and easily they make mistakes and lose their way, in short, how childish and childlike they are, but that there is not enough honest dealing with them. Whereas they all raise a loud and virtuous outcry when the problem of truthfulness is even hinted at in the remotest manner. All that pose, they all pose as though their real opinions had been discovered and attained through self-evolving of cold, pure, divinely indifferent dialect. In contrast to all sorts of mystics who fairer and foolisher talk of inspiration. Whereas, in fact, the prejudiced proposition, idea, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire, abstracted and refined, is defended by them with arguments sought out after the event. They are all advocates who do not wish to be regarded as such, generally astute defenders also of their prejudices, which they dub truths. They very far from having the conscience which bravely admits to itself, very far from having the good taste of the courage which goes so far as to let this be understood, perhaps to warn friend and foe, or in cheerful confidence and self-ridicule. The spectacle of the Tetarphany of old Kant, equally stiff and decent, with which he entices us into the dialect, byways that lead, more correctly mislead, his categorical imperative. Make us fastidious ones smile, we who find no small amusement in spying out the subtle tricks of old moralities and ethical preachers. Or still more so, the hocus pocus in mathematical form by means of which Spinoza, as it were, clad in philosophy and mail and mask. In fact, the love of his wisdom, to translate the term fairly and squarely, in order thereby to strike terror at once into the heart of the assailant who should dare to cast a glance on that invincible maiden, that Pallas Athene. How much of personal timidity and vulnerability does this masquerade of a sickly recluse betray? So here Nietzsche uh, does what he is famous for, and that is jab at other philosophers. So here, this one ties in a bit with verse 3, where he's talking about biases, innate biases. And this is something which normal people get accused of often, but very intelligent people get accused of less often. And that is to treat their opinions as fact. Intelligent people do this just as much as the average person, but it's more dangerous because intelligent people can take their biases and actually back them up with well thought out arguments and evidence. And philosophers are no different in that regard. And this is where Nietzsche is calling people out, is saying that these philosophers, they are supposedly enlightened, but they are more inclined to take a self-imposed belief or an opinion and just reason it out and make a very clear argument for that line of thinking that they have, for that opinion that they have, as opposed to actually be pursuing the truth like they say they are. It kind of also feels like Nietzsche is being a bit of a hypocrite here because he's doing very much the same things, but the fact that he's calling it out might mean he also sees it in himself because he likes to say, "Oh, I can see through your tricks," when he talks about old Kant, who was a very good um, writer. He had very good dialect and rhetoric, and he was very good at disguising his logic, his opinions with logic, and very persuasive in that regard. And it took a lot of reading and understanding in order to see through his logic, to find his opinion hidden underneath. But yeah, this is a very dangerous thing of intelligent people, because when an intelligent person does this, people are way more inclined to follow them, because very few people can argue with an intelligent person, because logic and reasoning is where the intelligent thrive. So if you try and combat these people using logic, they will most probably win because they are better at using logic than most people. And this is again where we want to look at the verse 3, because people have ingrained biases. Some people can come up with very sound reasoning, very sound opinions, but it's just an opinion. It's still just an opinion, backed up with most probably fudged data or biased experimentation. Even today, we struggle to encourage the scientific method properly. There's very few people who can say that they don't tweak the data just a little bit to try and prove themselves right when they should be trying to prove themselves wrong. You will find studies out there today which will try and prove any uh, public opinion that's going around. There's intelligent people who can actually do studies and do them in such a way that they generate biased results. So it's then very hard to know who to believe in this case. The truth is all muddied, and that is the problem with very intelligent people. He goes on to even mention Spinoza, who wanted to prove that the world is defined with mathematics, which is a very novel but thought at the time, and throughout years we found this to be true. You can use mathematics and calculus and arithmetic in order to predict the behavior of objects in the world very, very well. Rocket science is one of those things. If you follow Neil deGrasse Tyson, he'll go on to tell you that you can use mathematics in order to determine outcomes in the real world. Um, Objects, celestial bodies that are hundreds and thousands of miles away, we can accurately predict their movements using mathematical formulae. However, mathematics is still a language. It is still something that can be messed with, and something that is subject to the whims of mathematicians. If a mathematician is intelligent enough and capable enough, they can write mathematics in such a way in order to prove their opinions correct. And if they are smart enough, nobody will be able to disprove them that easily. Albert Einstein is famously one of these mathematicians. Um, he predicted that the universe is continuously expanding. He discovered the math that explains this. But even he believed there's no way that's possible. His natural bias told him that this can't be correct. No, the universe can't be continuously expanding. So what did he do? He created a second set of mathematics that says that there is an equal but opposite reaction that's constantly forcing the universe together, making everything static. And nobody saw fault with this math. They were able to accept the one line of mathematics and the other one, even though the other one was completely fictitious. Only recently in modern science were we able to disprove the false math, the one that says that there's an equal but opposite compressionary force on the universe. We now know that the universe is continuously expanding. It's been proven with mathematics, with observation, not with math, but with observation. We see now, yes, the universe is continuously expanding, and that the other line of mathematics Einstein made in order to counter the expansion was false. It doesn't exist. So even mathematics is not as ironclad as you might think. It's not a, it doesn't foolproof your biases. So that is something to keep an eye on for us as well. And especially for people with a more fragile ego, if you're one such person and you like to defend your arguments with logic, try truly challenging your logic at some point and see if you're just more biased than you might think. It's important for us to challenge ourselves and our lines of thinking to know whether or not it's real reason and rhetoric that we're using in order to see the world, or if we're coloring our biases as facts. On that note, I would like to end today's reading. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you again next time.